Welcome all viewers and welcome with the brain type stream. We're going to discuss brain types, or better yet, the Cybernetic Big Five Theory. If you have any questions, remarks, or if you disagree with me, please put it in the chat and then I'll take a look into it and answer it or discuss it, whatever is needed. So, welcome. Let's dive into it immediately. We're going to talk about brain types, just in the same way as your body has a different type than my body. Let's do those correctly. So, let's start again. So, in the same way that your body is this different from my body, and that, but we can still have different body types. In that same way, you also have a different brain than I have. And if you were to scan my brain or your brain, then it would be quite a different brain. So there are also brain types. This is found out by something called personality neuroscience, where they looked at people who were scored at the Big Five test. The Big Five is the most well-known psychological way of looking at personality, and they looked into whether if people scored the same way, whether they also had the same kind of brain structure. And that turned out to be the case. And then they discovered, so they created a scientific theory around it called Cybernetic Big Five Theory. And Cybernetic Big Five Theory basically states that the Big Five is not really about personality. What we think of as our personality really doesn't exist. Instead, it is evolutionary behavioral patterns. Our brain has been formed in evolutionary times in such a way that for certain behaviors, it follows the structure in our brain. For instance, I score high on extraversion. Extraversion is sensitivity to material rewards, money and food and stuff like that. And so that gives my brain, if you would scan my brain, you would see that I, on average, have more dopamine of dopamine cells in my reward areas that are used for dopamine reward systems in my brain. They are bigger, more developed, more brain cells. And that means that my sensitivity to dopamine is just a bit higher than average, or even a lot higher than average. So we're going to look at it. And we'll present my neurogram version of Cybernetic Big Five Theory, because that is a dynamic version of Cybernetic Big Five Theory rather than a static version that is the Big Five and Cybernetic Big Five Theory itself. But before we look at that, we are going to look into how Cybernetic Big Five is normally presented. So here you see how the Big Five is normally presented. So the Big Five are neuroticism, agreeableness, conscientiousness, extraversion, openness, intellect. Neuroticism is basically how you deal with stress. Agreeableness is basically how well you are able to function in groups. If you're highly agreeable, then it's much easier for you to function in a group. And if you're like me, then you score low on agreeableness, then it's much harder to function in a group. Conscientiousness is all about how you're able to protect your long-term goals against short-term impulses. Extraversion, and we already discussed that, is how sensitive you are for material rewards. And openness intellect is basically whether you are open for information coming in through the five senses, or whether you're open for reasoning inside your head. Now, what came about with this Big Five research stems already from the 60s. But what they found out was that you can even have two higher, more abstract concepts, and those are stability and plasticity. And those concepts are not the opposite of each other. They are definitely two different groups. And stability here has 3 parts. It has emotional stability, which is the opposite of neuroticism. It has social stability, which is agreeableness, and the stability of your goals. If you're able to keep your long-term goals safe against short-term impulses, then you are conscientious. And plasticity has nothing to do with brain plasticity, but it has to do with the ability to explore. And extraversion makes sure that if you're looking for material rewards, if you're sensitive to material rewards, you will explore a little bit less. But if you are more detached, we'll see, then you start to explore more. And the same with if you're very much about getting openness for sense data, then you explore a little bit less. But if you're open for reasoning, then you are able to explore your inner world, but you're also more able to explore the outer world, because you can come up with a reason why you should do stuff, even though you can't see it. And the most famous example is probably Columbus. Columbus figured that the Earth is a sphere, and that if you go to the Indias through the east, that it should also be possible to do the other way around, go to the west. And that he could not see, because if he looked out from Portugal to the Atlantic Ocean, he could only see water. But he knew he could reason, and that means that he could reason that he could be able to sail to the Indias by sailing west rather than east. And that, of course, helps him to actually explore it and become the discoverer of the Americas. And then you also have a lower level, what's called aspects, and every Big Five evolutionary behavioral pattern has 2 aspects. So neuroticism, either withdrawing, where people say, "Oh, I'm stressed, I'm going to withdraw from a society or from groups of people, figure it out myself." Or volatility, this is where they explode and become very angry at other people. Agreeableness comes in 2 evolutionary behavioral patterns, namely compassion and politeness. Conscientiousness is industrious and orderliness. That is all pretty much tied to achieving your long-term goals. Extraversion is tied to enthusiasm and assertiveness, where assertiveness is about wanting material rewards, and enthusiasm is about liking material rewards. And openness, intellect, I'm not very happy with it, but they split it in openness and intellect. Well, that seems like the same, just being repeated on a lower level. And so I've just taken it as openness for reasoning, as we discussed, and openness for the world or for the senses. So here you see the traditional Cybernetic Big Five picture, and you have to translate it. These are not personality traits. It is definitely not a trait theory. It's about behavior. These are evolutionary behavioral patterns, and they're just named in this more abstract way. So one of the issues with this is also what Professor de Jong, who created this scheme, has stated, is that there are many cross connections, cross correlations that are not in this scheme. And in fact, it is a static, that's my critic of the whole model, it is static rather than dynamic. And for that reason, I've created a dynamic version inspired by the Enneagram. But the Enneagram is not scientific at all, and Cybernetic Big Five Theory is 100% science. So for that reason, I like Cybernetic Big Five Theory more. But we can actually use that to come up with the same ideas, because the Big Five, the whole idea of the Big Five is that you can reduce every talk about personality and personality traits to the evolutionary behavioral patterns of the Big Five. And that's exactly what I've done with the Enneagram. So let's see how that looks. This is the first circle. So we start with stability in this basically the same way as Cybernetic Big Five does. But there's a difference, because here stability is mainly taken as social stability. So your ability to be able to work with groups of people. And this also means that here's the first big lesson, is that we want to make sure that you understand that rather than having a single trait, again, we already discussed, we don't like the trait theory, but instead of having a singularly evolutionary behavioral pattern, this is actually a spectrum. So if you look at the other side of stability, you see autonomy. So autonomy is a low score in stability, and stability is a low score in autonomy. This is basically a spectrum of two different behavioral patterns, evolutionary behavioral patterns, either the ability to work in groups, or the behavior where you say, I don't like groups, I'm more of a loner, and I want to be more creative, go against the grain, be a rebel, and go for my autonomy. Both are needed for society. Of course, we want to have lots of people who go for stability, because if we have too little number of people going for stability, then our society crashes because people are no longer working together. But if all people were to have social stability, then things would stagnate and everybody would fall asleep, and we would just get stuck with doing the same thing over and over and over. So we also need creative, autonomous individuals who steer things up. We come up with new things. They might fail, they might crash, but now and then they have a brilliant idea, and then they move the group forward. Group adapts the new goals and new strategies found by the autonomous individual. And of course, then the autonomous individual would be part of the group, but he doesn't like that. So he starts all over again, starts to see if he come up with new stuff to think of. So that is the stability and autonomy spectrum. The other one is plasticity. Yeah, we've seen that it is plasticity. But I'm using the old word for plasticity, which is exploration. I already talked about exploration, because I think it's much a better term than plasticity, especially because of the axis. So here you have another axis between, on the one hand, exploration, and on the other hand, exploitation. So what is exploration? Exploration is actually exploring either the outer world or the inner world to see if you can find new goals and find new strategies to achieve those goals. And there's a big difference, and that's also why they're not the opposite. There's a big difference between exploration, which is all about finding new goals and finding new strategies, and autonomy, which is all about creating new goals and creating new strategies. So that's a difference. It's also why they're not the opposite. So we have exploration on the one hand, and the other option is exploitation. So that is if you do a lot, if you score high on exploitation, you score low on exploration, and vice versa. And exploitation is basically where you take known goals and known strategies, and you're just trying to be as efficient as possible in exploiting the world. And that is, of course, completely different from exploring, because exploring is by definition highly inefficient, because you don't know yet what you're going to find. And so you can see that the cybernetic part of the whole system, Cybernetic Big Five Theory, comes from cybernetics. Something is cybernetic if it runs through the following cybernetic loop. That is, first, activate the goal. Second, select an action to achieve the goal. 3, do the action. And then 4, interpret the result of the action, or measure, as most scientists would say. 5, compare the result of the interpretation with the goal. And if the conclusion is that you achieved your goal, you go back to step 1, you activate another goal. Could be a copy of the same goal that you did before, if you're doing, for instance, factory work. But it could be a completely different goal, whatever. And if you failed to achieve your goal, you go back to step 2. You select another action, preferably a different action, to see if you can achieve your goal after all. But only if you have enough time, because the third option is that you did not achieve your goal and ran out of time, and then you go back to step 1 to activate a different goal, and then you actually most of the time escalate the problem to higher authority. So you can see that all of this is defined, all of the stability, autonomy, exploitation, exploration, in terms of achieving your goal. Where stability is, of course, making sure that you help others achieve their goals, or even better, you come up with a goal for the group or for society, and you try to achieve that goal. And autonomy is all about achieving or creating your own goals and creating your own new strategies. So that's the top layer of this figure. Let's move to the big five. And we can basically then add the big five like this. And then on top you have agreeableness. We already discussed that. That is how well you are capable of dealing with groups. Of course, this very much is in line with social stability. Hence its place on top. Conscientiousness, protecting your long-term goals against short-term interests, is all about exploiting the world, about being as efficient as possible. But it is also quite social still. It is quite near social stability because, of course, in most of the cases, your long-term goals are actually pretty much in line with group goals. And then open for experiences or sense data. That is, of course, also all about exploiting the world. Could be the inner world, when we'll see that some people exploit their feelings. They say, oh, I must be right because I feel I'm right. But most times also about exploiting the world. Because, of course, if you're open for experiences, you're very good at setting up feedback loops where you can actually do your strategy to achieve your goal and then measure whether you did achieve your goal. And extraversion, sensitivity to material rewards, is of course also about exploiting the world. If you're exploiting the world, there is a high chance that you're going to be rewarded with material rewards. And whereas you were to go explore the stuff, then of course that is highly risky, and there is a good chance that you do not get rewarded at all. But here you see the big five, or actually 4 out of the big 5. Because we miss neuroticism. And I handle neuroticism different. I'm about to publish a scientific article on neuroticism. So I take it neuroticism works quite different than those 4. Those 4 are actually, we're axes, they are actually spectra. So we have, if you score high on agreeableness, then if you go down, the opposite is antagonistic. Then you score low on antagonistic. And if you score high on antagonistic, then you scored a low on agreeableness. So we already seen these autonomous people, but they're also quite capable of putting themselves against the group. They are quite antagonistic, able to get into fights, able to withstand peer pressure and stuff like that. Conscientiousness, that's also an axis. You have conscientious people protecting long-term goals against short-term impulses. But you also have people who do the opposite. This is if you go across from right to left, then you end up with disinhibition. And disinhibition is, of course, where you let go of all the long-term rules, all the social rules, but where you just see if you can listen to short-term impulses, see what happens if you follow on your short-term impulses. And that's, of course, a version of exploration, because now you're exploring what happens if you give in to impulses. Again, open for experiences is also a axis, a spectrum. On the one hand, you have openness for experience, then you score low on openness for reasoning, and vice versa. And of course, if you are open for reasoning, then you're going to explore your own inner world, or even in a second place, or I say indirectly, explore the outer world after you have explored your inner world and come up with ideas of what you should be able to find in the outer world. So that's all about exploring. And extraversion, again, is people who score high on extraversion are very sensitive to material rewards. And the opposite of the axis or the spectrum is being detached. And when you're detached, then you don't care about the material rewards. And that makes it much easier to go on and explore things. So here you can see that stability, autonomy, exploration, exploitation are a perfect explanation of 4 out of the 5 big 5 and their opposites. So next opposites are all the aspects. So we'll check to see what we can say about the level of the aspects, and there they are. I can actually enlarge it quite a bit to make sure that everybody can read them. So agreeableness falls apart in the compassion and politeness aspects. Again, this is all very good and easy to understand. You have to feel compassion when you want to work in a group, and you have to have compassion to work for social stability. And also you have to be polite to work well in the group, and you have to be polite for social stability. Conscientiousness asks for industriousness and orderliness. You have to work hard on industriousness to achieve your long-term goals, and you have to do it quite neat and tidy. So there's a lot of need for orderliness. Well, we've already seen that open for experience and open for reasoning don't have their own aspects. It is basically a copy-paste of the Big Five level. So I have thrown that out of the model because it makes no sense to just copy the same thing on 2 different levels. But extraversion, we have already seen it falls into aspects: enthusiasm, assertiveness. Assertiveness, of course, being liking of wanting to have material rewards, and enthusiasm liking material rewards. But importantly, once again, is that we actually have, of course, we're a spectrum. Compassion, if you drop down all the way down, you find it callous. That's, of course, the opposite of compassion. And here, of course, you see that most people would say that, but also because they score high on agreeableness, that they say, yeah, because compassion is a good evolutionary behavioral pattern, but callous is a bad evolutionary behavioral pattern. But that is originally how Cybernetic Big Five Theory thought about it. But then they found out that that was nonsense, so they changed it. And that's actually, you can be a very positive but callous person, because again, if there needs to be crisis management, if tough decisions have to be made, if there's need for tough love, then it's better to have a couple of people who are callous and who can actually make those decisions and make sure that we survive as a species. Same goes for politeness. It's also an axis. It's also a spectrum. On the one hand, people score high on politeness, then they score low on belligerent. And if you score high on belligerent, you score low on politeness. And belligerent is the ability to take action, to fight for something, and to be able to confront people with their injustice, with the injustice being done. So again, you also need those kind of people. The same goes for industriousness. Industriousness is also a axis, a spectrum, and then you go from right to left. So the opposite of industriousness is undisciplined. So either you score high on industriousness, and then you're highly unlikely to be undisciplined, or you're undisciplined, but then you're not that industrious. So the people who give in to short-term impulses are way undisciplined, and the industrious people are very disciplined. And the same goes for orderliness and disorganized. If you score high on orderliness, you score low on disorganized, and vice versa. And of course, if you make a mess of things, you are disorganized. The assertiveness is also an axis. On the other hand, is if you're high on assertiveness, then you score low on submissive. If you score high on submissive, you score low on assertiveness. But again, not everybody can be assertive. Then we would get too much fighting and maybe even war break out. So instead, it is much better to actually have also people who are submissive. And finally, this is a very obvious spectrum, the spectrum between enthusiasm and unenthusiastic. And I score quite high on enthusiasm, but of course sometimes that means that I take too much risks. So it's much better to also have people who are detached and who are exploring, for instance, their inner world, without becoming enthusiastic about new plants, whether those plants are actually any good or whether they run too much risk. So here you have it, the whole of Cybernetic Big Five Theory, but now in a different scheme. And an important thing that we did by getting the inspiration or using the now I'm running into a problem. Here we are. Because of course we've added the dynamics of the Enneagram, and we're actually I'm about to publish an article which shows that the first scientific data also backs up this dynamic version of the Cybernetic Big Five Theory. So what happens, our brain has 3 different modes that it works. It can be stressed, it can be relaxed, and it can be in a kind of neutral state where it's neither stressed nor relaxed. And depending on whether you're stressed, relaxed, or neither stressed or relaxed, then you move through these different areas. So for instance, my brain type is type 3, successful worker. I score high on extraversion. That means that I'm in the mode of exploitation, being very sensitive to material rewards, and have a lot of assertiveness, enthusiasm, but only in the neutral state. Because when I relax, I actually move over to the opposite side. I get a combination of being detached and open for reasoning, and I become unmoved and more than willing to play second fiddle. So that's completely change of character, or as we would say, but we know there's no character, but at least it is a change of evolutionary behavioral patterns. And because these are my relaxation patterns, they actually are quite nice for me. But if I'm stressed, I also move from type 3 to type 9, and then I try to become much more social, but due to the stress, it's quite negative. It sounds nice. I'll act as if I'm compassionate, and I act more polite. I try to be more agreeable, but that is quite good on the outside, but inside I'm still stressed and I'm going, whoa, what do I here? I don't like these people. So you have to see all of this in the light of those dynamics. And when you see it like that, then you get much higher correlations between the actual behaviors of persons if you take into account whether they're stressed, relaxed, or neither stressed or relaxed. So far, my presentation. Are there any questions? Any questions, comments, remarks, disagreements? If not, then we're done for tonight. Then I invite all the Dutch people that are watching to join me on the stream tomorrow night when we are going to discuss the work of Professor De Venetti. We're going to look into subjective Bayesian statistics and the philosophy of subjective Bayesian statistics. And hopefully that will be a great stream, even though it will be quite technical. And I don't think that it will be a very popular subject, statistics, but who knows? No more questions, then we're done for today. Bye, bye, bye.